Or try to. We might have to skip over some things and run out of time. We're going to look at what we mean by infinite energy and free energy. What some people have said about free energy devices. We're going to look at cold fusion. This is a really big part of this presentation because it really is a big indication of the state of things in terms of the energy. Cold fusion is a real flashpoint in this whole scheme of things. We're going to look at some of the Tesla reproductions by Paulsness, which in itself is not free energy as such, but it's an indication of some of the technology that's been suppressed. We're going to touch on Wilhelm Reich, who I've mentioned before, because he comes into free energy technology as well. We're going to look at John Hutchison's experiments and his batteries that he's created. Water-powered vehicles, and I was just talking to Robert just before we started about one of the people that's been here and tried to get water-powered vehicles made in reality. We're going to look at Bedini motors, which I don't think that many people have heard of. Magnetic motor reproduction, which is an interesting little story. And then another big thing that I've got in here, which I found a bit more about when I was doing this presentation, is Bruce Stepaner and the End Machine. I've got a booklet about that because I thought it was so important. I printed out some booklets. I've got about 4 or 5 copies. We're going to look at the death of inventors. We're going to look at Dr. Stephen Greer and his energy projects, who I've followed for the last few years. So that's an interesting story that people need to know about. And then we're also going to look at the weaponisation of this technology, which is one of the main reasons why we haven't got access to it, because it's already been weaponised. And I'm going to remind you about that for those that have been here before. And then that plays into why we've not got widespread use of this free energy technology. Okay, so let's start off with some common statements that you hear from authority figures that Rob referred to in his introduction. Free energy is impossible. There is no such thing as a free lunch. Free energy is impossible because it breaks the first law of thermodynamics. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Heat and mechanical work being mutually convertible. That's what you'll see in the textbooks. So you can't get energy from nowhere. You can't start off with a system and get energy out of it that was more than was apparent there in the first place. If someone had created a free energy device, they'd be a billionaire. So now you know that free energy doesn't exist, because if you create a free energy device, you don't become a billionaire. So therefore your free energy device is no good. Because if it was any good, you'd be a billionaire. Some of you know that's not true. Perpetual motion is impossible. There's this confusion between perpetual motion and free energy. It's kind of like one of these automatic statements that come out. No one has demonstrated a device which produces more energy than is fed into it in some form. I dispute that, and I think you're going to see a lot of disputation of that in what I've got for you tonight. Now here's one simple example, which I came across again. I've not heard of this before doing this presentation. Michael Faraday was a Fellow of the Royal Society, 1791 to 1867. That was his birth and death. He was an English chemist and physicist who studied the magnetic field around a conductor carrying the DC electric current, and he established the basis for the magnetic field concept in physics. He discovered electromagnetic induction, diamagnetism, and the laws of electrolysis. Michael Faraday did an experiment on December 26, 1831, which he co-rotated a magnet with a copper disc, I think I should say copper disc rather than Cooper, and a measured current output. He measured the current output. Even though he had done that experiment, his own law of induction tended to ignore that fact. Known for over 150 years, the operation of a Faraday homopolar generator whose current generation could not be properly explained. It was just left to one side. The world later embraced Faraday's two-piece induction generator, whose drawbacks include mechanical friction and electrical losses. So in other words, the modern electric motor ignores this homopolar generator concept. It was like they took the wrong road in physics all those years ago. I'm going to come back to this in the form of the End Machine later on. Now Tesla, again, he comes up a lot. I haven't got a lot about Tesla in this presentation, hardly anything. This is about it. One day, man will connect his apparatus to the very wheelwork of the universe and the very forces that motivate the planets and their orbits and cause them to rotate will rotate his own machinery. That's what he was saying. Tesla's experiments showed that there was a radiant energy field present everywhere. It just needed the right equipment to extract this energy, and sometimes you needed to put energy into a system to make the radiant energy visible. So you need to put energy in before you get the energy out. Now, of course, Niagara Falls famously used generators which were originally designed by Tesla, so he knew what he was doing. That was one of the first operational hydroelectric stations in the world. I forget the date it came into service. But even when they set that system up, they noticed some unusual effects in the energy that came out of it. Now, before we come to more modern times, I'm not going to focus so much on the historical stuff, but I just wanted to mention a few devices that I've come across. There's loads of these. When you go and look for them, again, it's like a lot of this stuff. You start looking, and you just it's like drinking from a fire hose. There's just so much stuff. James Griggs, 1980s, the hydrosonic pump. This was a simple system whereby you pump water through a rotating flywheel. You rotate this thing at very high speed. It appears to heat the water. It does heat the water, and the energy that you can extract from the heated water seems to be greater than it should be. It works out that it's 125% efficient.
Sonoluminescence.
And that's another thing. This is a different. This isn't sonoluminescence, but not the hydrosonic pump. That's a different. It may be to do with cavitation in this as well. So the underlying principle is the same. But there's no light involved in the hydrosonic pump. Magnetic sink circuits. This is one thing that Wilbert Smith designed to extract energy from the Earth's magnetic field, only in a small amount. And then we've got Schauberger's experiments in the 1930s and 40s, another water-powered device which rotated water at very high speed. And the Nazi regime invested money in this. So, you can go and check that out if you wish. Just to show you that I've looked at some of these terms, these are some of the scientific terms that come up. For example, coefficient of performance. One of these terms is sometimes bandied around. What does it mean? Well, it's basically used to define heat pump efficiency. And this is just something that you can look at if you're into the science of this. It stands for coefficient of performance. Basically, T1 is the condensing temperature, T2 is the evaporated temperature, and this is how you work out the efficiency. And then it is normal to express this coefficient as the ratio of energy output to energy input rather than use temperatures as shown below. So that's another way of expressing this. Typically, a heat pump operating from a source temperature of 5 degrees centigrade and designed for heating only would have a coefficient of performance of about 3, whereas a reversible machine for the same conditions would have a coefficient of performance of about 2.6. So that's what the scientists will tend to look at and gauge these devices based on this coefficient of performance. Okay, right, well I've just got a very short clip here, I think I'm going to play, by this guy, Nick Cook, who's the former editor of Jane's Defence Weekly.
In my experience, there are people who are now producing small but usable amounts of energy from the vacuum of space.
Give me some examples. What have you seen?
Well, there is an individual who doesn't want to step out of the limelight quite yet, but who is in America and who has developed a device which, to my satisfaction, is producing small but usable amounts of energy from.
Tell me everything you know about the device. I mean, did you get to see it? Did you get a demonstration? Did you get to examine the device? Tell me what you know.
I haven't seen the device yet, but we have talked about it at length. I have sent emissaries to go and look at people I know who are scientists to go and look at the device, and they came back to me and said, this is real. It is producing usable amounts of energy, and so at the earliest opportunity, I'm going to go out and see this guy. I mean, unfortunately, there is, there have been huge demands on my time since publication of the book, and a lot of people step forward making these claims. So I have to be very careful about. If
all right. Well, you've got to be careful. You've got to be careful about the whole thing, Nick. But tell me if you know, if you sent a scientist, what did this scientist come back and tell you about the energy that it used to get started, or did it keep going perpetually? Or give me some idea of what we're talking about.
This particular device requires a small energy input to get started.
Okay.
But once it is up and running, it's a solid-state device, and once it is up and running, it continues to churn out small levels of energy of the order of several hundred watts.
Oh.
But it deems to be scalable, and in time, the inventor predicts that increasing levels of output will be there.
So he's basically talking about an invention he became aware of at that time. I don't know the specific device that he was referring to then, but typically what he went on to describe was the way that these devices work. A lot of them involve high-speed rotation, we've already mentioned that with the hydrosonic pump, or high-frequency changes in either magnetic fields, electric current, or electric fields. Those are also common characteristics. Now we're going to look at some of the techniques and devices that have basically been developed that I've come across over the last few years. There have been a number of reproductions of some of Nikola Tesla's experiments, and there are quite a few. Again, just go onto YouTube and you can find these things. They've reproduced the wireless transmission of power technology that Tesla has done. And what I've got here is a video of that this guy's actually able to illuminate a bulb underwater. I'm just going to show you the video. It's not in of itself free energy, but this whole idea of wirelessly transmitting power in and of itself is, you barely come across it.
Good afternoon. I'm going to show you a few things that Tesla has sent to us many years ago. Out of his lectures, books, on page 134, figure 19, you'll see the circuit right here. And also the same circuit can be found in his book, The Innovations, Research and Writings of Nikola Tesla. In this book here, it's found in several places. The one we're going to be demonstrating today will be on figure 183. Also, I've gained some of this information from Jerry Vasilato's book, Lost Science, and his other book, Secrets of Cold War Technology. Both are invaluable. Here you'll see my setup. It's 2 copper rods connected across the top with another copper rod that is on a slidable scale. I can slide it up and down. I have lowered it from the higher position today just so you can see it on the film. My camera's not quite tall enough to catch the whole thing, but it's slides up and down. It's just 2 parallel bars of copper. At the bottom of there is capacitors, just like he says in his book, and the spark gap in the front here, powered by a 10,000 volt transformer at the back. And I'll be connecting light bulbs across the bars on these 2 slidable points, both of which are independently slidable. All light bulbs are 110 volt bulbs. The only little bulb will be this bulb right here, which is a 12 volt light bulb. That's for out of an automobile type bulb. And this fluorescent tube here, I don't think it has a voltage rating on it. And we also have this big fluorescent tube over here. So I'll turn the machine on now. Arc is quite loud, so I won't be talking during this part of the demonstration.
So you can already see we've got a different type of technology at work there from what we use normally. Okay, the next person I mentioned before, Wilhelm Reich, he was sort of doing stuff in the 40s, 50s and 60s mainly. He discovered a form of energy called orgone, which I've talked about before briefly. And he claimed that it was the energy from which everything else was made. This could be another version of etheric energy, zero-point energy, vacuum energy. Reich also studied this energy in relation to human sexuality. That's how he discovered it, how he discovered this energy. And he came into this because he worked as a research assistant for Sigmund Freud. So this, you know, this guy was well known. And Reich constructed and conducted experiments with orgone accumulators. So again, it's alternative energy stuff. And I'm not going to read out all the text. I'm just going to skip to the clip of Dr. Eugene Malov, who we'll talk a bit more about in a bit, and what he said about Reich.
Wilhelm Reich, a brilliant man that he was, an unusual man, because remember, he did come out of a sexual psychiatric orientation, right? With
yes.
Sigmund Freud. So who is some person like that to say anything about physics?
Right.
Well,
right.
In 1941, brilliant fellow that he was, he brought some interesting observations to Einstein. He actually had 4.5 hours with Einstein. By the way, this meeting is virtually absent from all accounts of the biography of Einstein.
Why? Because of what happened
Reich
to Reich?
was later disparaged. He died in prison, remember?
Yeah, okay.
He turned into, just like cold fusion, an insane pathological man.
Do you think Einstein took some ideas from him?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Einstein, he asked Professor Einstein, a colleague, of course, in the fight against fascism. Remember, this was early 1941, before the United States got into the war.
Right,
But,
okay.
Of course, both of them were opposed to the Nazis, obviously. And
well aware of what was
and well
going on.
aware of the possibility. So Einstein, to his credit, felt that all possibilities should be explored in the possible quest to find ways to deal with perhaps war technology and what have you. You know, his letter later on to President Roosevelt obviously helped the Manhattan Project get going.
Mm-hmm.
But here was Reich showing him a simple experiment whereby a mercury thermometer, very accurate mercury thermometer, on the surface of what we call a Faraday cage, a steel enclosure, was higher and remained higher throughout the day than a similar mercury thermometer suspended in air. Okay, now this sounds, your listeners even who don't know about this may say, well, that sounds crazy. What could that possibly show? Well, careful experiments by Dr. Paulo and Alexandra Correa in Canada confirming this type of experiment, and in fact giving it an even worse bias against being seen. In other words, not having the orgone accumulating layers of material around the Faraday cage, just using bare steel boxes, so to speak. In their laboratory, they have found persisting, round-the-clock, elevated temperatures on the metal Faraday cage, even in a darkened room. Now, when I first saw their ether motors and their PAGD, okay, I was obviously motivated to go back and study Reich. Prior to that, I had no interest in Reich. But I wondered, well, God, I mean, could Einstein have missed in 1941 a profound discovery? And the answer is absolutely yes.
Yep.
And we cover this in our issue 37. He brought it to Einstein. Einstein confirmed, I repeat, confirmed that there was a 0.3 of a degree or more elevation on the Faraday cage. But his assistant, Einstein's assistant, Leopold Infeld, poo-pooed it. He did some half-baked experiments to suggest that, oh yes, it's a simple explanation as to why this elevated temperature is there. And he pushed Einstein away from thinking about it, and thus broke the connection, the critical connection between Einstein and Reich, which if it had persisted, and if Einstein had behaved himself and continued the correspondence, Reich did write many letters, technical letters, to Einstein, pleading with him to reevaluate the assertions, the glib assertions of Leopold Infeld.
So that was basically Malov discussing what Reich had done, and he was basically saying that if you set up this control box and a thermometer above it, the thermometer that was above the orgone accumulator would go to a higher temperature of about 3 degrees centigrade higher than the control box. So Reich was basically saying, to Einstein, where is this energy coming from to raise the temperature of this thermometer? And Einstein started to get interested, but then his assistant said, no, it's, it's of no interest, don't look at it. Okay, so now we'll move on to another person that's been involved in the free energy scene for quite a long time, John Hutchison, who I've spoken about several times here, and will do so again. Now, he can produce this levitation effect. I might have a clip here, I'm not sure, with between 75 watts and 1.5 kilowatts of power. In one demonstration, he's able to levitate a 70-pound cannonball. I've got a DVD about that there. I'm not sure if I put the clip in here, but in November 2008, he reproduced the levitation effect as part of a challenge because somebody said to him, you cannot reproduce this. This is in my book as well. The other thing that comes up in John Hutchison's experiments, and we'll revisit this briefly later, is the melting and fusion of metals. So the point about this is, where is the energy coming from in John Hutchison's experiments to melt and fuse the metals? If he's only using 1.5 kilowatts of power, which is what you use to boil a kettle, how are you going to melt and fuse metal with that sort of power level? It's not possible. It's because of the way he uses the energy. So I've got a clip. You've obviously been playing with this for a long time, and I know you've been through the wars, at various times with having your equipment confiscated and things like this. That I believe that's happened at least twice. Is that correct?
No, main time was 1990 when I was in Europe. It was the Canadian government that took the entire laboratory and tried to make a secret operation, but the newspapers found out about it and published the news. Okay. And yeah, that was. But I've been raided before in 2000. Okay.
And one of the things that we wanted to just check with you, that I believe it was in 1983. There was a person called John Alexander, Colonel John Alexander, in fact, who'd come to see you because he'd learned about what you were doing. I wondered if you could sort of mention a little bit about that.
Oh, yes. Colonel John Alexander was 1983. He came with a team from Los Alamos, and he said to me that we're expecting a threat from, as I recall it, a threat from the Soviet Union. Okay. And that was a concern for the American government. So I gave a demonstration for about 4 months working with the team. And unfortunately, there were some effects that happened, and sometimes it didn't. It seemed like the equipment was sabotaged, and I learned from yet another lieutenant colonel that a fellow by the name of Bob sabotaged the entire project. So John Alexander was a little upset over that, and he brought in another team from McDonnell Douglas to do a clear, not classified report, which I still have that report. And then after that, of course, the Canadian government did their experiments and kept it a matter of national security. Of course. Now, I think that's really interesting that we do know that people in the military are well aware of what you've been doing. It's not as if you have been, working away totally as like a hermit. They're fully aware of what you've been doing. Mm-hmm. And we understand one of the key things is that in many cases when you start your experiments, you can switch off the power and the effect that you're generating will continue. Well, we're trying to do a parallel here, I believe. And when I switch off the equipment, sometimes there's metal samples that have been analyzed by the Max Planck Institute that seem to be accelerated in time, ahead in time. Wow. And the crystalline structures are always changing very fast, and the magnetic properties are changing extremely fast. So this is in regards to when I basically shut down the power, these samples, which are many of them, tend to alter. Right. Ongoing. The energy in the equipment has been measured at 100 to 400 watts. was giving a demonstration for Maine News. The newscaster accidentally chopped the extension cord in half by accident and shut down the entire lab. So it's around 400 watts for lowest power. And if I'm using more modern equipment, of course, I'm up to maybe 1,000 watts energy to drive the systems and that. The mayor of this city came here, and he's a couple of years ago talking with me, a friendly fellow, Mayor Wright of New Westminster, and he was talking about he's giving reports of concrete cracking up as well as citizens in distress. And it seems when I do an experiment like I did for National Geographic TV and Film, I blew out the elevator, so they couldn't get their equipment down after the experiment. And just recently, for Fox TV, I was doing an experiment, and then some plumbing exploded downstairs. But I take in consideration, too, that when I was doing the McDonnell Douglas experiments, that we had a water main explode out in the street. So that's written up in some of the text. So I've been through a lot of mischief.
I think one point I wanted to just dwell on for a second is that Judy and I we watched the internet forums quite closely, and there are quite a number of people who are saying, oh, John Hutchison can't reproduce the effects which he's makes, and I wondered what your response would be. I almost feel silly asking the question, but
honestly, I think they don't listen to radio or watch TV or read books, because I've been doing this quite regularly for Fox TV in 2000 and onward up for Griffin Productions, as well as National Geographic TV and Film, and onward with many, many different crews have come and gone out of here, and I can sit down, turn everything on, and guarantee an effect within 5 minutes. So whatever they're reading is maybe so old that they just don't bother researching. That's what I feel.
That's just an overview of the Hutchison effect stuff. I've got a whole DVD of that, and that was indeed me speaking to him, and that was in 2008 in January, when we were on a radio show together with Dr. Judy Wood, which comes into 9/11, which I'll come back to later. So the point about showing you that is that you can see we've got a clear exhibition of anomalous energy effects. No doubt about it. This energy is coming from somewhere. It's not theoretical. The physical evidence, you can pick it up and touch it. The other thing that John has worked on is these crystal batteries. And John explains that the batteries exploit energy in the zero-point field and therefore don't run out. In various audio recordings, he's mentioned the military. In that previous recording there, he verified the military did go and see him in 1983 from, of all places, Los Alamos National Laboratories, which, in case you didn't know, is where the A-bomb was developed. It is difficult to get these batteries that he makes, though, reliable. Only about 1 in 10 that he makes will give out a useful amount of power. And I've got a longer video about the batteries, which I've linked onto this website, which I created for John when his previous website was essentially hijacked. So you can go and watch that there. A bit about the batteries here.
Using common minerals, I'm able to capture the jitter of the zero-point energy that's the hot talk of many physicists around the world. And I'm able to create cells and structures similar to this one here that actually produce power for long periods of time. As you can see, we're getting a reading here of almost half an electron volt from this pile of crystals. And this is steady and has been tested up to a year's time and under stress tests also. So, which made me decide to then, of course, mount the same material in cylinders. And these cylinders here, of course, are various types of cylinders, one being an artillery shell or aluminum cylinders. I could take this one here and do a reading on him. And actually you cannot see that, but we'll try here. Okay, I can tell what we're getting. About half a volt. About half electron volt on this guy here. Different cylinders, of course, there are different mixes in there, and I found that that some of the cylinders are not as powerful as this material here or this very tiny one here. Actually, this has more power than this large artillery shell unit here. And what I want to do, of course, is to demonstrate it in the sense of it making actual power. That means to turn a small motor. And that can be done. I've accomplished that many times. We're just taking a reading here on the very small one, 1 cubic inch of raw material from the earth. It's still powering for over a year. Basically, I want to use these as replacements for batteries, which I think I can achieve. And to demonstrate even more so, I'm looking for a hot cylinder, which I'll call a hot one. Will maybe be this one, which is a combination of material from this little cylinder back into here. Instead, actually, well, we can take a voltometer reading on him and see if he's up to par. We get 1.635 electron volts, so I think that he's lively enough to power this little motor. And we'll find out. So I'm holding this motor here. I attach a lead to the base. Get him out of the way. Okay, I'm attaching this to the base here. Another lead to the top, and it should spin, which it does. So yeah, basically, this kind of material powering motors. Of course, it's a very small motor at this time, but scaled up in larger amounts of material can power up to several horsepower if needed. But that basically is sort of the secret to the energy crisis, in my opinion anyhow. Just using ordinary materials, non-toxic, that will interface with zero-point energy in space and time.
So, with that sort of experiment that he's been doing, you can imagine if you were to have the funds of a military-industrial complex behind it, and you could come up with something much more effective. And I think that has been done. Now, the really big thing which came onto the scene, which a lot of people heard about, was something called cold fusion. Now, Pons and Fleischmann these two guys were well-regarded world-class chemists, so they're not your John Hutchisons with no scientific qualifications that started off experimenting in their garage or whatever. They had worked for 5 years to develop a process which seemed to yield too much energy to be a simple chemical reaction. In other words, they'd already done various experiments and thought, this isn't the result of, base plus acid gives salt plus hydrogen or anything like that. This was something else that was going on, like hundreds of times the amount of energy that could have come from a chemical reaction. In 1989, they announced their findings at a press conference, which in of itself was unusual. Normally such findings are announced in scientific journals first, through the peer review process. And they were criticised for this, as I said, they would normally put it in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. Now, the problem is that cold fusion wasn't one of the problems was that it's not the correct name for it. It should be called low-energy nuclear reactions, because that's the best description for it. The somewhat inaccurate description of cold fusion appears to have been coined by Dr. Stephen E. Thermite Jones. How interesting is that? Yes, he is the very same, for those of the people that have done the research and know that name.
Water itself is quite a mysterious and powerful substance. Given enough time, it can erode steel and rock. It is composed of hydrogen and oxygen, two of the most reactive elements on Earth. Science has also known for over 200 years how to extract hydrogen and oxygen gas from water through the process of electrolysis. It was from this field of electrochemistry and not nuclear physics that there emerged a revolutionary idea of a new kind of fire from water. In the 1980s, Fleischmann and Pons used their own money to conduct experiments for 5 years, they passed a current through an electrochemical cell containing heavy water, or deuterium oxide. One of the electrodes, the negatively charged cathode, was made of the precious metal palladium. The electrical current separated individual deuterium nuclei, or deuterons, from the heavy water and forced them to pack tightly into the palladium cathode. What happened next inside the palladium at the atomic level remains a mystery and became the subject of intense debate. Whether it was actual nuclear fusion or some other as yet unknown phenomenon, the result produced far more excess heat energy than any known chemical reaction. Why is such a phenomenon so astonishing? Why did it provoke such outrage in the physics community? To most classically trained physicists, the concept of low-level nuclear reactions producing significant heat energy was inconceivable.
It was a very unfortunate time to make such an announcement for various political reasons, really. The situation in the United States, the situation with regard to the program in hot fusion. That was against it. But also, of course, was the fact that we were not ready to make such an announcement. The criticism of pathological science is one which has quite frequently been leveled at unusual investigations, which admittedly sometimes are at fault. However, there is also the situation that people will criticize a field long after they should really have given up. And that is pathological criticism. They just get trapped in a situation. They have made a criticism. They have to maintain that criticism against all the evidence.
At Texas A&M, a group led by Professor John Bockris, who is widely regarded as one of the world's greatest electrochemists, reported finding the hydrogen isotope tritium, a key signature that some unusual nuclear reaction was going on.
The first thing was this thing called tritium, which is a sub-form of hydrogen which should not exist except in extremely tiny quantities. We found that by working these cells of Fleischmann and Pons containing lithium hydroxide and deuterium oxide, that we could produce this tritium in great abundance. Let's say at 10,000 times more than it ought to be there, as it were. And let me stress that we couldn't do it every time, but about one result in 5 or one result in 4, and eventually we worked up to 2 results out of 3. We could produce tritium. That was the first thing, and in a way it was the first clear proof of the phenomenon.
At Texas A&M, Bockris's group found themselves under attack. Science magazine writer Gary Taubes wrote a stinging article that insinuated that someone in the group had spiked the samples with tritium. Although unfounded and eventually proved untrue, the allegation effectively dampened Bockris's remarkable claims.
Well, I was 69 years old at that time. I took the attitude, suppose they fire me, right? It doesn't really matter. I'd had my career. The worst they could do would be to say, go, your tenure is withdrawn. And therefore I wasn't frightened. And I went on saying the truth and publishing what we'd got. But finally the university revolted against this. And they set up an inquiry, as they called it, rather sinisterly. The accusation was that I had carried out misconduct of research, you see, that I shouldn't have worked on these things. And they decided that the accusations were totally groundless, and they published all this. But then they started all again about 6 months later, and they had another committee. It was this time, when my lawyers asked the university what the second inquiry was about, they were told, it's an ad hoc committee. What's that? We have nothing further to tell you. And so this went on for 11 months of constant meetings and inquiries and so on. And I'm quite sure that they were trying to find an excuse to end my tenure, you see. Finally they came out okay. I mean, they gave me another letter. I'd had the letter of complete exoneration, This time it said that they had spent this 11 months and had found that I had never done anything, the phrase used were, that contravened the rules of procedure of this university, or something rather formal and stuffy like that. But I think the main part was that I had done work which was against the paradigm, and that was what they were really upset about. You know, people said that they'd been to other universities and people had laughed at it and said, "What the heck are you doing, trying to disprove the laws of nuclear physics?" And of course that's exactly what we were doing, and succeeding, you see.
Even though positive results were still coming in, the Department of Energy's negative report effectively killed congressional funding in the United States. Fleischmann and Pons later packed their bags and left for France to carry on private research sponsored by the Toyota Corporation.
By 1992, we had video recordings of intense energy release. By the summer of 1994, we had demonstrated sustained energy release. That, of course, if you say you wish to make this into a device, required further research. And we were always working on a time frame of trying to get to that point by about the year 2000. And I think that if the resources had been available, we would have got to that particular point, probably before the year 2000. But this did not happen.
Yet as early as 1992, cold fusion experimenters began reporting unusual appearances of trace amounts of different metals such as copper, silver, chromium, and zinc when examining their spent cells. Rechecking for possible contamination, scientists like Bockris and Miley confirmed that indeed new metals and isotopes were being formed, transmuted, during the process which produces excess heat.
Kevin Wolf made many measurements of tritium. Then he got some even more astonishing results as early as '92, which were these transmutational results, the metal forming another metal inside the electrode, you see, which was super anti-paradigm. You know, there's that dreadful word alchemy, which we mustn't use, but it was a form of that in a way, that was creating new metals, you see.
In Japan, Tadayoshi Omori and Tadahiko Mizuno at Hokkaido University have produced volumes of data under rigorously designed experiments showing the production of metals ranging from iron to platinum and beyond. The Omori cell using a tungsten cathode has consistently produced excess energy along with measurable amounts of transmuted metals.
So there, in a selection of clips from a documentary called Fire from Water, you've seen the essence of what cold fusion was all about, and all the important bullet points are edited together in that clip. You had somebody like John Bockris. I mean, what a guy, what an absolutely fantastic guy. I just loved watching him in that documentary. Absolutely. You know, he was at the top of his establishment, world-class chemist, and he wasn't afraid of coming out and saying, we disproved the laws of nuclear physics. And then going into the transmutation, which is like changing one element into another. I mean, look at the world is run. Gold. What if you really can turn lead into gold? I think the guys at the top can do that routinely because they've got the version of this technology that can do it. That would be my guess. I can't prove that, but it wouldn't surprise me. It's just another control mechanism after all. So this is why cold fusion, why you've never heard about it since about 1990 or thereabouts, because it was so important to keep this crushed down to the lowest possible level, because it is so important. And some of what you saw there is you know, a sketch of it. I've got another clip here of Steve Jones, because this is from I'll just play the clip.
Since Pons and Fleischmann were both well aware of the pitfalls of premature publicity, why would they bypass the accepted conventions of the peer review system and announce their discovery through the media?
I was thinking, these guys are no fools. They know what they're doing. These are good scientists.
Prior to the 1989 announcement, Stephen E. Jones, a physics professor at nearby Brigham Young University, learned of Pons and Fleischmann's work through an informant at the DOE. In a flagrant example of shameless opportunism, Jones insisted on going public quickly with his comparatively much less clear results. Disparaging the excess heat claims of Fleischmann and Pons, Jones' announcement would have effectively prevented the two scientists from patenting their process, a process they had developed on their own over long years of research. On the advice of university attorneys, Pons and Fleischmann, feeling their backs to the wall, reluctantly delivered their work to public scrutiny.
And then I've just got a brief audio clip of Jones, the very same, talking about what he said about cold fusion. This is very short.
Is it a shortcut to fusion energy? I don't want to disappoint anyone. I think I'll put read my lips answer here, and then I'll carry on. I think that'll become clear why I'm saying that. Can you read my lips on that back in the back? It says no. Energy is a long way off. That's why I say no. This is our result. Way off. That's why I say no. This is our result. Way off. That's why I say no. This is our result.
Basically, what he said was you can't get any energy out of the cold fusion process. So not only has Jones led the whole 9/11 truth movement down this false path, and he seems to be able to sleep at night, he has helped to deprive the world of the technology of cold fusion, which would offer cheap, clean, renewable energy for all kinds of sources. He's helped to stop that happening. What drives these people?
It's the American government and the CIA that's responsible.
And I think it goes beyond that. It's worldwide. It's the same in this country with people like John Maddox, who ran the Nature magazine, who published an article to kill the reputation of cold fusion. That's also in one of the documentaries that I've got on the DVD. So the cold fusion summary, I think we'll have a break just after this slide. It seems the whole affair was managed from start to finish. Jones got in early. The goal was to trash and debunk the science, and it seems a whole array of skeptics and debunkers were wheeled out to stomp out the fire. And that's documented in Dr. Eugene Mallow's book, and I'm going to come back to what happened to Eugene Mallow after this. It was the first time that the phrase pathological science was brought into general use. Anyone who believed, quote unquote, in cold fusion was guilty of practicing pathological science. You were a UFO believer, a Holocaust denier. Heresy. You would be burned at the academic intellectual stake. And it continues to go on to this day. And I was speaking to somebody, I went to a thing in Nottingham about 2-3 months ago, and I got onto the topic of cold fusion. Oh, their results have never been reproduced. That's nonsense. There have been hundreds of reproductions of cold fusion. I got a booklet which I meant to bring with him, but seem to have left it at home. You can easily find them on the internet. But in many cases, the thing is, it's difficult to reliably reproduce them. You heard John Bockris say that. Even though he knew his experiments were valid, he said that they were only getting 1 in 5 runs working and doing things. So there's something very unusual about the conditions under which these energy effects come into being. And different reproductions of different results in terms of excess heat, evidence of nuclear process and transmutation of elements. Some people have never seen that in their experiments, and they'll therefore say, oh, we've done hundreds of runs and we've never seen transmutation of elements. So I think, yeah, we'll break there, because it's just on 9 o'clock now, and then we'll come back to Bruce De Palma and the End Machine. Thanks.